Hi everyone, I'm Joe. Today it's time for me to do my monthly reading wrap-up for September 2023. September was a good reading month in total. I read 3 books by 3 authors, kind of, in either 2 or 3 genres, maybe. You'll see when I get to the books in question. And the first book I will immediately get to is a very personal and a very emotional book for me, and indeed for the person I've already read it with, and that is T. Pratchett, A Life in Footnotes, written by Rob Wilkins. This is the official biography of T. Pratchett, who sadly died in 2015. Surprisingly long time ago now. It still feels very, very recent, and indeed far more recent than 8 years ago now. Remarkable. I already read this with a friend of mine and fellow booktuber, Rachel, because T. Pratchett both has an awful lot of meaning for both of us, as an author and as a person. Now, my personal connection to T. Pratchett, I suppose you call it, or is that when I was younger, the first book I ever picked up and read of my own free will was The Colour of Magic, the first Discworld novel. And indeed, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th and 10th books that I picked up and read of my own free will were the 2nd to 10th Discworld novels. In that order. So I reread them so many times, it is incredible, and T. Pratchett as a person meant a lot to me, and I think, and I often class him as having a very significant effect on me at that exact age. I mean, I was 8 years old, 9 years old, late to reading, and T. Pratchett and the Discworld affected especially my sense of humour, if not other parts of my personality to a small degree. So it's a significant author and a significant figure for me. And the two of us reading about and then bouncing thoughts off one another about T. Pratchett and how he approached life, his work ethics. I mean, he was a workaholic, which neither of us knew to that level. His rather interesting sense of humour, which blatantly obviously we both knew about. Obviously seeing it in a rather more personal setting was really interesting. And just also about who is Rob Wilkins, the author. I literally did not know Rob Wilkins at all. I knew that in the later years of T. Pratchett's life, obviously due to his illness, that he had assistants and such. I didn't realise that Rob Wilkins was his personal assistant and saw an awful lot of T. Pratchett, and was essentially very much a sort of an influential figure and significant figure for T. Pratchett, and indeed he actually has the rights for Discworld related content. He owns the IP for Discworld, which is quite something. I mean, T. Pratchett must have, and does obviously, trust him to that level to be able to say, like, my life's work is now in the IP, and the idea of it is now in your hands. That's quite something. This was an original book. I mean, for the record, when I heard about T. Pratchett's death in 2015, that is only one of 2 times that in my life that I can actually remember that I actually cried, because of what it meant to me. And frankly, reading the book, now I didn't feel like I was going to cry during the book, but I certainly felt sad and quite wistful that I'd got to meet T. Pratchett at, obviously a convention or book signing or something. I never managed to do that. So, but this was nice to read about his life, and indeed read about the end of his life, even that he was sad, but nice to know that he went doing what he loved. I mean, he was writing until the end. The thing that's interesting is the amount of ideas he had for books right at the end was very interesting. You actually get told a few of these ideas, what these ideas were in principle, and there could have been at least 2 more Moist von Lipwig novels, another Guard novel, and a second novel or sequel to Maurice and His Educated Rodents, which would have been rather curious as well. So there potentially could have been some unbelievably good novels coming up, which never got to see the light of day and never will, because actually the ideas were destroyed after death or upon his request. He did not want anybody, tempted to write his ideas into words. They were his ideas, only his. I like that. I mean, obviously it's a shame in a sense. You'd almost want somebody else to do them, but obviously it's understandable why not. So this was a interesting and a very powerful book, which frankly, if you're a Pratchett fan, then I would recommend that, because it is really something really quite special overall. The second book that I read in September was New Sons 2. This is the second short story collection edited by Nisi Shawl. The first volume of this I read about 2 years ago now, and I loved it. And as expected, I loved New Sons 2. This is a fairly slim but very compact and very well selected short story collection. It is science fiction. The authors are, as often is the case with these things, some of them are well known to me, some of them are total knowns. And the most powerful stories in this, which I'm not going to name because I don't want to influence people, were by authors that I were totally unaware of. And I will say that the writing was amazing, the ideas were very interesting and novel and quite different. They often are in these various collections. This was pretty strange for certain reasons, and I loved it for that reason. And it was just a very powerful and well written short story collection by an interesting and diverse cast of authors, and I would recommend this. I mean, if you read the first New Sons, then this is basically more of the same, and if you like that, then it's more of the same of frankly amazing ideas and amazing writing, and very well choiced by Nisi Shawl, the editor, to put the stories in this particular order. They worked very well indeed in this order. Each story flowed on to the next in a very natural way, and it really was quite impressive to see. And the third book that I read in September also has something like that, where parts flow into another, and that is, I finally finished reading, after mentioning it in the previous 2 wrap-ups, The Gene, written by Siddhartha Mukherjee. This is non-fiction. It is about genetics. Specifically, it is about the history and evolution of genetics, and it came about from, some basic ideas many years ago to obviously what it is today, and obviously all the technologies related to it currently. And it's also mixed, and this is where the that sort of seamless interactions that I mentioned with the previous book comes into play here, with Siddhartha Mukherjee's personal history with genetics. As his family, on the male side of his family, they are predisposed to certain medical issues, let's say. I'm not going to say what, because it's worth reading by yourself, but his family is predisposed towards certain things, and his father in particular. And he starts off the book by talking about his family, his father and his brother, or could be his brother-in-law now, and how that has affected him and how that's affected his overall family dynamic. And then he seamlessly goes into the diagnosis of that. Where did the diagnosis of that come from, and where did the history of that diagnosis come from, and goes into the history of genetics. Then he sort of seamlessly, and I was really surprised by just how amazingly seamless this was, he goes back into the next part of his own family's history and the journey of self-discovery for his family members on genetics and what it could mean for them. And then from there, it seamlessly again sort of goes into the history and evolution of the more slightly more recent. And then again, it does it again and goes into different aspects of it. And this was just extremely well written. I took a long time reading it. I mean, I read this in 3 months, mainly because I was at the start 2 months ago in mid-July now when I first started reading it. I'm not used to reading non-fictions like this. I mean, I almost never read non-fiction, frankly. So I was unsure where to start. It took me a while to sort of get into the rhythm of the book. And finally though, literally only in the last 2 weeks, I finally got into the book really heavily. And something just clicked with me and I was really engrossed in it. So I've been reading it still relatively slowly because it's non-fiction, it's about genetics, so I can't take all of this in too quickly, but still a lot quicker than the previous 2 months where I read 50 pages in 2 months, and then I read the entire rest of the book in 2 weeks, as you sometimes do. And I'm very glad that I read this because this was very personal, very informative, and just really interesting to read because I knew things as such about genetics, very broad concepts and ideas, but nothing this advanced. And this, I think, is a very good starting point. I mean, whether I'll read other things in the genetics world, I don't know, but this is well worth reading, and I really would recommend this one if obviously genetics and that field and those sciences are of interest to you. And with that said, that is it for the books that I've read in September. But before I do my usual thing of waving these books around and telling you about my social media links and such, there is 2 other little areas that I'm going to briefly mention. The first of those is a friend of mine, Kelsey, known as the Fantasy Hat Lady Reads, is doing and hosting her first ever readathon on BookTube called No News Releaseathon. The idea of this is because Kelsey has read an awful lot of new releases in the last year because she's been trying to read things for the Hugo Awards and such. So everything that she's read has been released in the last sort of year and a half, 2 years, maybe 2.5 years. So she hasn't read a large amount of the books that are older than that, pre-2020, that have been sitting on her shelf, and she wants to create motivation for herself and do a sort of fun readathon and to try and encourage others to do the same. And I'm perfectly happy with that idea. I mean, no new releaseathon for me is more like everyday book readathon because I don't read that many new releases because I have difficulty getting hold of them because they are horribly expensive and not paperback when they're first released. So it's less of an issue for me, but it will create some interesting reads, and indeed I've already got 2 buddy reads planned for the new releaseathon, which I am very interested about indeed. So I will link the appropriate things that Kelsey created if you want to have a look. The new releaseathon, there are some prompts. They are not some massive in-depth thing with rules and such. They're more just like light-hearted motivation for you to read the same book. And the second thing I'm going to talk about is movies. Specifically, I had a 3 month of Amazon Prime that I finally activated. I get a 3 months of Amazon Prime every few years, and September was one of those months. And there were 2 films, 2 things that I watched in September that were book related. First was Good Omens, based loosely and sort of on the book by Pratchett and Neil Gaiman, season 2. Obviously season 1 was based directly on the book Good Omens. This is essentially a case of Good Omens, more adventures in the world type idea. Because obviously it's nothing to do with the book anymore. And obviously Pratchett has nothing to do with the writing of it. It was, thankfully though, at least done entirely by by Neil Gaiman. So there's still that link there, and it's still Good Omens, but obviously being entirely Neil Gaiman rather than the humour of Pratchett. You can tell the difference. It was good, I liked it, but it's not going to compare to season 1 or indeed the book, because the humour's not Pratchett. You can tell that Neil Gaiman has done a very, very good job indeed of trying to keep a certain essence of Pratchett and his sort of mind and thoughts alive within the show, but it's still not going to be the same. So I would say it's well worth watching, it just wasn't as good as season 1 or indeed obviously the book, which is what I expected, frankly. And the second thing I watched was Dune Part 1, the new movie adaptation of the book, obviously by Frank Herbert, directed by Denis Villeneuve, released 2 years ago, was it, or 3 years ago now? Very recent. And that was an interesting watch, because I was obviously apprehensive about watching it, because I thought, well, considering the David Lynch 1984 version was made, let's say, and it was dubious at best. I mean, some of the things they changed to make it into a movie with the 84 version, Lynch version, was debatable, and that's been generous. Very debatable. This was far more accurate. It felt right. Actually, the world of Arrakis, this desert world with the giant sandworms, which you do get to see some of us, which I'm really glad of. I was wary of that, by the way. I thought, please say that you're not going to have a Dune film where the worms are done really poorly, or you don't even see the worms. The worms are just like kind of a mentioned, oh, there's a worm over there, and you don't actually see or interact with it. You do. Obviously CGI, but done extremely well, and I was happy with the film. It was worth seeing, and overall I was actually impressed by how they made it. This was more accurate to the book than I would have ever guessed they would be allowed to do by the studio. I thought the big studio and things would probably say, oh no, you've got to change all these things to meet various criteria to make it a saleable and a profitable movie, and yet they actually kept some pretty significant things in the book that were major things, like obviously the Gom Jabbar scene, where a certain character has to go through a kind of a very strange and very quite nasty psychological test is in there. There's a fight scene towards the end of this movie, because the book has been split into 2 for this, is there as well, which I was hoping for but didn't expect, and frankly I'm glad I watched it. And now, finally, I will indeed wave around the books that I read in September, because that is it for everything that I read and watched, and I plan to watch read due to the new release read of them. So all the links to everything that I've read or watched or anything else can be found in the description box below. If you've read any of these, then please leave a comment, or if you have any suggestions based on books you think I might enjoy based on those, and again leave a comment. I'm always interested in getting into new authors and new genres and such. And with that said, that is it for this video. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in another. Bye for now.